So how do you like classify the different explicitness of it? Because you have some manga which is really fluffy and okay to read, and then you kind of get into the more dangerous areas.
Well, that really is a question of like who you're talking to.
Mm-hmm.
Because on the one hand, if you're like me and Kay, who are a little more, shall we say, up to date with like Japanese usage,
Mm-hmm.
all of it's called BL, and then you have BL, and then you have R18 BL, or maybe Ero BL, which is the explicit stuff. But like BL could still be that stuff, you know. But if it's not, if it doesn't have an R18 on it, then you're like, okay, well, it's probably not like super hardcore, but there still might be sex in it, because BL actually is very unregulated in Japan, because you know, it is marketed primarily towards women, and women's sexuality doesn't count. Women's sexuality doesn't exist, you know, so like
they don't even bother regulating it.
Yeah, exactly. That may change just because like BL manga has been getting harder and harder, and I mean that as in more explicit over the years. So there may reach a point where they're like, wait, this is like full on porn. You gotta put this behind a curtain. But until then.
Yeah, so they haven't gotten as far as like the tentacle messiness of it all.
You can still get that in BL just as much.
Yeah, you just don't have to show your ID to buy it. That's the key.
That's insane. So it basically it doesn't exist for like the censorship.
Oh, there's still censorship.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, the glowing parts.
Yes.
And also when publishers really want to play into that, okay, this is more explicit and we want adults to buy it, they will mark it with this mark of this is for people that are 18 or more, and they'll put it in special jackets. But as in general, like a general rule, it's like R said it, you know, you don't really need the ID.
Yeah. So for those who haven't read a lot of mangas, yaoi mangas, boys love, they do censor the dicks with either like, some of them have like just this bright white light on them, like making them look like a halo.
The glowing private parts always make me laugh.
Yeah. Or there will be like a black line through them, or just in general like pixelated sort of. It's really weird. I've never understood why they did that, because it's graphic anyway. So why is it that like the dick is the problem?
To bring it a little bit to your expertise, I was really surprised when I was watching Tarn Type and all the alcohol was blurred out. It's like, well, obviously they're drinking alcohol, so it's not really any different than that. You know, it's like everyone knows what's going on, but it like still meets the legal standard for censorship. And like a lot of Asian countries do have much stricter rules on pornographic material than a lot of Western countries do.
Yeah. So when I grew up, when I read boys love mangas, everything was categorized under either yaoi or I can't remember.
Shonen ai.
Yeah.
This is where you get to, it depends on who you ask. Because there are still people who use those categorizations. And not to go too much into a history lesson, but they're both rather outdated.
Yeah.
Yaoi started in like the 1980s. And it did refer to often fan doujinshi, specifically pairing characters from established relationships. It's not relationships, from established media like shonen manga and stuff like that. You know, manga for boys, comics for boys.
Yeah.
And then in the mid 90s, that's when like BL came around. And so everything pretty much switched to the BL label. For shonen ai, it's primarily used to refer to like the 60s and 70s.
Okay.
So
It's also fair to say that both labels were much more widely used in the West rather than in Japan. They were also used in Japan, but in the West there was these two labels kind of made the difference, what was more explicit and what was not.
I don't think did we say that yaoi was used for the explicit stuff and shonen ai was like they kissed and that was it? I don't know if we probably made that distinction. In the West.
In the West, yeah. I mean, at least the parts that I was most familiar with, they made quite distinct. They made clear distinction between those two. Like shonen ai was always used for works that were like super fluffy, nothing sexual happened, and yaoi was used for sexual stuff, which I think left quite stigma on a lot of BL nowadays as well. Yeah.